Hi, everyone.
Hello.
I am Lauren.
I am Ken.
And this is Paradise After Dark.
Dark.
Paradise After Dark is an independent podcast covering true crime,
unsolved mysteries,
missing people,
and urban legends.
If you'd like to support our show and get a bunch of extra Paradise After Dark content, plus early and ad-free episodes, please sign up for our Patreon at patreon.com/Palmahawk Media. That's PALMAHAWK Media.
And be sure to check out our website, paradiseafterdark.com.
On our website, you'll find links to all of our episodes, even the archived episodes, our mailing list, merch store, links to our social medias, and of course, our Patreon.
We also have a virtual tip jar there, so if you leave us a tip, we'll give you a shout out on the show.
And we would just like to say, Happy New Year!
Yay!
Welcome 2022.
2022. Here we are, folks. Here we are.
So, Ken, what's our first episode of 2022?
It is a mind-boggling,
mind-blowing
mass of misfits.
Yes.
Murder,
that's a good way.
Mystery, and mayhem all in one.
It is. This is going to be a two-parter, guys.
And I do have to tell you.
We're jumping into 2022 with all we got here.
Hardcore. Speaking of hardcore, before this episode, I just want everyone to know that I was in the gym today and I was doing push-ups and I was doing curls and bench press trying to prepare for this episode tonight. So, Lauren, what exactly is this episode about, this two-parter you speak of?
So this week we are discussing the Sun Gym Gang. Now it's SUNGYM, Sun Gym Gang. Their story sounds like something out of a movie, and the story was actually turned into a movie in 2013 called Pain and Gain, directed by Michael Bay, starring Mark Wahlberg and Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. But here's the real story. In 1999, the Miami New Times wrote a series of articles about the gang, upon which the movie was loosely based on. And we're going to go ahead and give credit to the Miami New Times with a lot of the information that we obtained about this story for this episode. So, the Sun Gym was opened in 1987 by a man named John Meese. Meese started serious bodybuilding at Texas A&M, where he earned an accounting degree.
Ooh, an Aggie.
In 1962, while in the Air Force, he was stationed in England and, with a 60-inch chest and 19.5-inch biceps, won the title of Mr. United Kingdom. The next year, he was accepted as a Mr. America contestant, but the Air Force denied him leave to compete. Now, he promoted bodybuilding competitions. When professional bodybuilders came to Miami to compete, most trained at the Sun Gym. Anyone could join the gym, of course, but if you were soft and puffy, you were way out of your league.
Needless to say, I didn't go to that
gym.
Yeah, I didn't go to that gym today.
Sun Gym favored guys who were thick and ripped. This was not a place for weekend warriors.
And Miami was the perfect place for this gym and this persona, because it has all those people that want those massive beach bodies.
Yes.
So this is the perfect place. Mm-hmm. But Meese, he had a hard time running this gym. Now, one of his Sun Gym managers left for vacation and was arrested in Louisiana with massive amounts of cocaine and amphetamines in his car. Up to snuff, this guy. Another manager, he was an ex-cop, he quit working at the Sun Gym, then performed the ultimate reverse sting when he led 3 drug dealers out to the Everglades and then executed them. Now, Meese claimed that other employees had stole from the gym. One quit, swearing that Meese had swindled him. And the clients of the Sun Gym were also problematic. Most were convicted felons, bad guys, dirty cops, etc. Now, one Miami police officer told the Miami New Times that he could, quote, meet my monthly quota of felony arrest in one night at the Sun Gym by running background checks on the patrons pumping iron all around him. This is not the ideal place to hang out.
Yeah, apparently. By 1992, Mies was ready to throw in the towel. His friends and family were pressuring him to give up on the gym. It was a bad investment. He was spending too much time running it and not enough time doing his real job as the president of an accounting firm called Mies and Associates in Miami Shores, which he had opened and run since 1970. This is when we meet Daniel Lugo. Lugo. Daniel Lugo was a New York native who had moved to the area 4 years earlier. Lugo had tons of ideas about improving the gym, adding a juice bar, starting a Sun Gym clothing line, a karate team, Sun Gym vitamins, and even creating new software for the business that would help streamline everything. Now, Mies thought Lugo was his ticket to his happy medium. He'd be able to keep his gym and also focus more on his accounting firm, which was his main bread and butter. So Mies was so excited about the prospects that he overlooked Lugo's past. Lugo had just served 15 months in prison at Eglin Air Force Base Federal Correctional Institute, a minimum security prison camp in Florida's Panhandle, and was beginning a 3-year federal probation period full of special terms, which included paying $70,000 in restitution to his victims. In 1991, Lugo had been arrested and pled guilty to fraud. He had been convicted of fraud for pretending to be part of a Hong Kong bank that was looking to invest in American small businesses. The scheme involved collecting upfront fees for loan insurance and then not actually delivering on any loans. Now, that's not a red flag or anything.
You should probably check.
You should probably hire this guy to run your business. I guess
I would definitely get a resume. But according to the Miami New Times, by summer of 1994, the Sun Gym did feature a juice bar, aerobic workouts, free weights, hammer, Nautilus, and cam machines, even babysitting services, and on the sly, a variety of illegal steroids that were available in the locker room to those that were interested. And Lugo's illegal activity started up again not long after he was hired here at the Sun Gym. Almost immediately after Lugo was released from Eglin and hired by Mies, he met a weightlifter at the Sun Gym who had an affinity for white-collar crime and also was fresh out of jail as well. Now, together they established 10 phony medical companies, then rented dozens of mailboxes, many at the Lakes Postal Center in Miami Lakes. They bought names, social security numbers, birth dates, and other information about legitimate Medicare recipients for $10 apiece and mailed fraudulent bills to the government for non-existent medical services. $10 a piece. That's cheap.
So Lugo's new best buddy was Noel, a.k.a. Adrian Doorbal. Doorbal. Doorbal.
Yeah, doorknob.
So he went by Adrian, and the two had met a few years before through a girl Lugo was working with at the time, Lucretia Goodrich. Now, Doorbal, a cousin of Goodrich, recently had arrived from Trinidad and was living at her house while he got on his feet, getting ready for his life in the United States. A 10th grade dropout, he worked as a fry cook at Fiesta Taco in Kendall, Florida, riding a bicycle to and from work. Over time, the two men took jobs as personal trainers in a series of Miami gyms. They were also constant, serious workout partners. After Lugo was released from Eglin and divorced from his wife, Lillian Torres, he married Goodrich. With her cousin added in the mix, he got a 2-for-1 deal, a spouse and a best friend, for better or worse. Lugo soon hired Doorbal to work part-time at the Sun Gym. While running his Medicare scheme, Lugo kept most of the money, which was apparently fine with his partner. His partner would later tell police that he was afraid of Lugo because he had heard that Lugo had once hired a hitman to kill a former partner. When the scam was over and the two went their separate ways, Lugo deposited all of his money into a mutual fund account under Doorbal's name. He was mindful of his probation, and he still owed his victims over $70,000 in restitution, remember. In February of 1994, a man named Carl Weeks moved from New York to Miami. Weeks was actually trying to kick a drug habit and get away from his life of crime. He moved in with his girlfriend's cousin, Stevenson Pierre, hoping to make a fresh start. Pierre had already been hired by Lugo to create a collection agency for overdue gym membership payments. This didn't really work out due to the cost of starting that type of business, but Pierre stayed on at the gym and worked as kind of like the back office manager in the weight room before ending up as a desk clerk. In September 1994, when Weeks arrived in Miami, Pierre took him to the gym and introduced him to Adrian Dubois and Daniel Lugo. But Lugo refused to hire Weeks. Weeks bounced back and forth between Miami and New York, collecting public assistance checks and food stamps.
Got to stay on the up and up. So finally, in mid-October of 1994, Lugo calls Weeks. Now, he told him he had a job for him. They did meet at Lugo's office, which was a nice office space in the Miami Lakes branch of the accounting firm headed by the Sun Gym's owner, as we spoke about earlier, John Meese. In attendance at this meeting was also Adrian Dubois and Stevenson Pierre. Lugo asked the two men, Weeks and Pierre, if they were interested in making $100,000 for 2 days' work. I mean, who's going to say no to this concept?
Exactly.
Especially when you don't really care what you're doing. So he had recently discovered that the gym member named Mark Schiller had stolen not only $100,000 from him, but an additional $200,000 from a gym member named Jorge Delgado. Now, Jorge Delgado worked out with Daniel Lugo as his personal trainer at the Sun Gym. Now, a few years earlier, Delgado was fired from his job as a car salesman. And Delgado's wife, Linda, who worked for Mark Schiller in his MMS accounting services office in West Dade, cried as she described to her boss the couple's financial troubles. Now, Schiller, sympathetic, offered Delgado a job at his firm as a gopher. Just go get me coffee, go get this, run this there. But it didn't take long for Delgado to have the title of marketing representative, so he's moving up the chain. Now, as time passed, Delgado and Schiller became close friends and partners in the several business ventures, including a nutritional supplement company and a new accounting firm. Fits right in there for the gym. Now, Schiller trusted Delgado so much that Delgado knew the alarm code and layout of Schiller's own home. Now, all in all, Delgado had profited immensely from the relationship, and Delgado tried to bring Lugo into the business with Schiller, but Schiller thought Lugo was coarse and creepy. When they had their falling out, it was over Delgado's preoccupation with Lugo. Schiller said, him or me, and Delgado picked Lugo. And Schiller warned him, that guy's going to get you into a lot of trouble somewhere down the line. And the falling out with Schiller really took a toll on Delgado's finances. I mean, Delgado was really counting on him and the job that he was giving him. He'd moved up the ranks there.
Yeah, but it was his own choice because he chose to be in business with Lugo.
Exactly. So I understand where Schiller's coming from at this point. Well, Lugo was egging him on. What kind of man would take food from a baby's mouth? And this referring to Delgado's children and the baby that Delgado's wife was now carrying. She was pregnant. They intended not just to get the money back, but to take everything from Schiller. Now, Schiller needed to be taken down, said Lugo, and Weeks was reluctant as this was the exact type of activity he was trying to avoid when he moved into Miami. But eventually he did agree and join the gang, so to speak.
Okay, well, Mark Schiller was born in Buenos Aires, but left Argentina with his family when he was 4 and grew up in New York City. After obtaining a business degree from the University of Wisconsin, he took a series of accounting jobs before becoming a comptroller for the U.S.-owned oil pipeline company in Bogota, Colombia, where he met and married his wife, Diana. In 1989, his boss had been kidnapped and held for ransom by the Army of National Liberation, ELN, a guerrilla group that regularly attacks foreign-owned oil pipelines and foreign employees in Colombia. Negotiations between the ELN and the company's attorneys dragged on. The settlement took months to reach, and U.S. employees of the company were ordered back to the States. This was when Schiller and his wife moved to Miami. They began raising children. He set up a successful CPA practice and dabbled in other businesses. He had a franchise deli and the nutritional supplement company. They met again. Now we're going back to Lugo and Delgado. Met again a few days later at Lugo's office, and this time Jorge Delgado was present. He okayed the plan to abduct and, if necessary, kill Schiller.
Whoa.
Now he was ready to provide information about their relationship, the man's private life, and his daily routine. The plan to abduct Schiller forced him to sign over his assets and potentially kill him. Delgado was able to give specific information about Schiller, including the codes to his house.
All in exchange for the money.
The money that they were
$100,000
going to get. No. Delgado was not going to get any money. They were bringing in Weeks and Stevenson. They were paying them $100,000 to be a part of this. So
that's right.
Delgado was going to be in on the big payday, which was all of the assets. So the Sun Gym gang, which now consisted of Daniel Lugo, Jorge Delgado, Carl Weeks, Adrian Doorbal, and Stevenson Pierre.
And you add Meese in there, and you got a six-pack of meatheads.
Pretending to be a security crew for a rock band, entered the spy shop on Biscayne Boulevard owned by John Demeter. The gang bought shock-inducing taser guns, stainless steel handcuffs, and a small Motorola walkie-talkie featuring privacy-enhancing point-to-point communication settings, just like the cops use.
So they were getting set up for this attack on Schiller.
Yes.
So in doing so, the gang had varying plans and made attempts to kidnap Schiller. Now, for Halloween, they actually planned to wear ninja outfits and knock on Schiller's door, but this plan never did transpire. On an early morning in November, Doorbal and Pierre and Weeks, dressed in black and wearing gloves and military camouflage makeup, crawled across the lawn, planning to storm the house when Schiller went to get the papers. However, they got spooked by a passing car and abort, mission abort. I think I read somewhere where they were actually screaming as they were running across the yard, abort, like they were really... They had got their minds focused on this whole...
They had like some Mission Impossible type stuff going on.
Exactly. They had this whole vibe going on that they were really pulling off this big heist. And they actually in total had 7 failed abductions. I mean, if you go in and research them, you'll see each one. It's almost... The failures were comical.
It is almost funny.
But it turns out not to be, but it's the initial is comical for sure.
After the final failed attempt to abduct Mark Schiller, which occurred on November 14th, 1994, Doorbal and Weeks dropped Pierre and recruited Mario Sanchez, a.k.a. Big Mario, a former Sun Gym weightlifting instructor and licensed Florida private eye. That same afternoon, Schiller was snatched up in a parking lot by 3 men who stunned him with tasers, punched him in the face, and forced him into a van. Once inside the van, Schiller's ankles were shackled. He was handcuffed behind his back and duct tape wrapped around his entire head. The Sun Gym gang then took Schiller to Delgado's warehouse. That evening, they retrieved Schiller's car from the parking lot where he was abducted and drove it to the warehouse and made Schiller call his wife and tell her to go with his children to Colombia, giving the gang access to his house. While at the warehouse, the gang tortured Schiller. They tased him, threw punches, and pistol whipped him. The men took his Sharper Image all-weather lighter and burned him on his arms and chest. They played Russian roulette against his temple. Gagged and blindfolded, chained to a warehouse wall, he found it ironic that he'd moved his family to the United States to avoid the very thing that was happening.
Yeah, back at the pipeline where they were kidnapping people.
Schiller was also forced to call his business associates over the next few days and tell them a fantastic story. He'd fallen in love with a hot young Cuban named Lillian Torres. She drove him crazy, so loco he would have to convert his assets to cash and ride off into the sunset with her. The gang forced him to sign document after document. Now, obviously, Schiller was still blindfolded with the duct tape, so he had no idea what he was signing. Instead of the quick strike 2-day abduction the Sun Gym gang had hoped for, it took weeks to convert Schiller's assets, weeks of torture. The big score eluded them until his accounts from Switzerland and the Cayman Islands finally were routed into his Miami bank account. When they freed his right hand again, he signed over $1.26 million. On December 10th, as the last money transfer was completed, Lugo, Dubois, and Delgado reached a decision. It was time for Schiller to die.
You know, one thing, too, keep in mind is as he's being tortured, he wasn't fed. They didn't give him food until the end. I think one guy finally started bringing him food. He wasn't given bathroom breaks. He was forced this whole time, and it was almost like a month, I think.
It was about 30 days they had him.
That he wasn't even allowed to go to the bathroom. He just basically pissed and shat himself.
So Pierre and Weeks tried to dissuade the others from killing Schiller, but to no avail. There was, after all, his $2 million MetLife insurance policy, and one of his signatures had designated Lugo's ex-wife, Lillian Torres, as the new beneficiary. Now remember, they said they made Schiller tell all his associates that he had fallen in love with a hot young Cuban named Lillian Torres. Well, Lillian Torres, as we mentioned earlier, was Lugo's ex-wife. The plan was to get him flaming drunk over the course of several days and send him out in his Forerunner to a fatal crash.
Which they attempted to do and succeeded somewhat, because on December 14th, 1994, the last full day of Schiller's captivity, Lugo ordered Schiller to wash down some sleeping pills with some more booze. So they just kept filling him full of alcohol. Basically, drink this, drink that, drink this. And when Schiller refused, then they decided, you know what? He's not going to listen. We're going to shove these pills down his throat. So they do that. And at 2:30 that morning, after 3 days of forced drinking, Schiller, who was unconscious, was tossed into the passenger seat of his own Toyota 4Runner. Now, Lugo drove while Weeks and Dubois followed. They picked a crash site in the warehouse retail district 3 blocks south of Schiller's deli. Now, when they reached the spot, they strapped Schiller into the driver's seat, and Lugo moved to the passenger side, stomped on the gas pedal, and steered the vehicle toward a concrete utility pole. Just before the collision, Lugo jumps out. Now, when they run up to inspect the wreckage, they found Schiller in the driver's seat. He was alive, but unconscious. So Lugo decides to splash gasoline all over him and then around the interior of the 4Runner and, of course, light it up. And they had added a portable propane tank for the barbecue, as everyone knows. They added this for good measure, hoping that once the fire got going that it would explode.
Now, can I ask you a quick question?
What?
Because you deal in propane. Everybody who's listened to our Bob Ruff
You're going to ask me
interview, will that happen? If there's a propane tank in a car that's on fire, will it explode?
It will eventually. No, it can eventually explode, but the only way for it to levy would be basically for it to be in a really intense fire. What would happen in a barbecue tank is you would actually just get more. To get an explosion, you have to have an accumulation of gas. So they would actually have to open the valve up, fill the car with it. But what happens is when the propane tank gets very hot, the liquid inside expands, and there's a relief valve on the back. So when it expands so much, it opens up and just lets more gas out. So what you'd have is this massive fireball. You would have to burn that for probably about 45 minutes into this massive fireball in order for it to levy. But at that point, a regular barbecue-sized tank would not explode. It wouldn't have enough gas in there really to explode. It would be empty by then. Based on the videos and the research that I've seen and the stats of a barbecue-sized tank. So to get an explosion out of one, you have to have an accumulation of gas, not throw a propane tank in there, most likely not going to explode, just a massive fire.
So they were kind of like...
Well, you can tell in this whole plot of events that we're going to see, they're rookies. They think that they're so far beyond intelligent when in fact they're just guys at a gym.
Meatheads.
Meatheads. Yeah, there you go. Or what do they call them?
I don't know.
But anyway, so they assumed that this was going to explode. Obviously, like we just discussed, it wasn't going to. But in their mind, they figured it would explode. But so they go to pull away. And incredibly, they saw Schiller open the door and climb out of the Forerunner. Keep in mind, because he was all these drugs and the alcohol, the flames and the fire actually woke him up. And he decided, even if you're really messed up, you still see fire for whatever reason. You just get out, you leave. So Schiller climbs out of the Forerunner. So these guys, they turn around and tried to hit Schiller with the car, but he kind of wasn't easy to hit because he was so messed up. He was still dodging them. And when Weeks finally did hit him, Schiller bounced onto the hood and flew off. Now, Weeks began to drive away, but Lugo and Dubois yelled, no, go back, run him over. So Weeks turned the car around and ran him over. Do it again, they screamed, but Weeks saw the approaching headlights of another car, same thing that foiled their plans before. Hey, there's a car coming, we got to go. So they were in the attempt of backing over him, but Weeks hit the gas, and they speed off, and Schiller laid there on the ground as the Forerunner was just engulfed in flames. So what a mess for poor Schiller. This guy.
That is insanity. It's like a movie.
Yeah, this guy is literally, he's beaten, tortured, threatened. I mean, they burnt him. They didn't feed him, and then they put him in a car and they crash
him.
It.
They set him on fire. They run him over twice.
Exactly. It's like, whoa, and he's still alive. So this is proof. This is proof point right here that if it's not your time to go,
it's not your time to go.
So
when they returned to the warehouse and met up with Delgado, he was not satisfied that Schiller was really dead.
They had no idea. I mean, they're still confused.
He never wanted to use the staged accident idea. He thought it would have been better to kill Schiller and then put him in the car and run it into a lake or something. But Lugo thought it would take too long for the body to be found, and he wanted the insurance payout that he had made Schiller sign over, naming Lugo's ex-wife as the beneficiary, so he insisted on doing it that way. Lugo showed Delgado the damage to the Camry they had been driving, and Delgado remarked that it wasn't enough damage to have killed someone. So Schiller was admitted into the hospital on December 16th of 1994, being treated as a John Doe and possible DUI case. Meanwhile, the Sun Gym gang was watching and reading the news looking for any report of a DUI accident, but there was nothing. They began calling around to area morgues asking if their friend had been found. When they couldn't find a dead Schiller, they looked for a live one. They found he had been treated at South Miami Hospital he was in critical but stable condition. They made the plan to visit him in the hospital and finish the job, killing him. But by the time they arrived at the South Miami Hospital, Schiller had been moved to Jackson Memorial Hospital.
And a word from our sponsor. So, Schiller's civil attorney, Gene Rosen, called Ed Dubois. Now, this is a famed private investigator in the area, telling him he had a client who needed his help. And Dubois headed Investigators, Inc., which is the oldest detective agency in Florida. So this is a big deal. Now, he usually had much bigger fish to fry, like reviewing security procedures for the upcoming Super Bowl, as he was the NFL's investigator and security consultant in South Florida. Now, Dubois coordinated with law enforcement agencies to provide safety for dignitaries, politicians, celebrities, and anybody who would attend these festivities. So you're Arab prince and you need security and you're coming to the Super Bowl, this is the guy you call. So when he gets this call from the lawyer with this outlandish story, he wasn't very interested, but said he would speak to the client. So he's like, you know what? I don't really do this kind of stuff. So when Schiller phoned later that morning, he sounded drugged, thick-tongued, yet edgy with fright and desperation. So he's scared a little bit, but probably still a little messed up from all the happenings.
Right.
So Mark Schiller tells Dubois that he was a local businessman, currently a patient at Jackson Memorial Hospital, recovering from an operation to remove his spleen and repair a shattered pelvis and a ruptured bladder. Think about that. That's just one operation of, I'm sure, many that he had. Now, when he'd come out of anesthesia, his surgeon told him he'd had an accident. But Schiller, whose credibility was undermined because when he entered the hospital, he was suspected as a DUI case. Now, he insisted that he'd been kidnapped and tortured for a month, but I'm sure he probably just looked rough. I mean, he hasn't shaved, he was dirty, smelly.
Right, exactly.
Drunk, drugged. So they probably just thought this is just some guy that was down on his luck that just got shit-faced drunk and went out and wrecked his car. Mm-hmm. So, which makes sense. He said that for weeks he had been chained to a wall and tortured in unspeakable ways. He'd been forced to sign away his house, his investments, his bank accounts, his life insurance. And in the end, the kidnappers tried to kill him, and they actually were pretty damn close. But
they nearly succeeded.
Exactly. But, things just worked out in his favor. Now, whatever landed him in the hospital, he couldn't be sure, but he was certain that his captors had tried to kill him, and they would most likely come after him again, so he begged for this guy's protection.
Well, Dubois didn't really believe Schiller's story. It was way too crazy.
It is.
He reckoned that if this story was true, even partially true, it probably was a drug-related abduction, and Dubois didn't want to get caught up in anything like that. But on the other hand, druggies never settled matters through civil attorneys like Gene Rosen. Now, Mark Schiller had an attorney, Gene Rosen, who was the one who contacted Ed Dubois. And Rosen said Schiller was legitimate. More curious than anything, there'd been no ransom demand, and Schiller was alive. All were highly unusual factors. So Dubois gave Schiller his best advice. Scram. Get out of Miami. Schiller could take his complaints to the police, he added, but he should talk with his doctor, leave the hospital as quickly as possible, and hide in a safe place, any place but Miami, while he recuperated. Dubois even offered to drive him to the airport, but Schiller never called him back. Meanwhile, the gang was figuring out how to sneak into Jackson Memorial Hospital and kill Schiller.
So they had found him.
Yes. Doorbell again volunteered to strangle him while the others staged a diversionary fistfight in the hallway. They also talked of silencers, of sneaking up the stairwell and killing everyone in Schiller's room. The consensus was that suffocating Schiller with a pillow was the best idea.
I'm confused. These guys just really try to overplan this stuff.
In the end, they decided to wing it. Whatever method worked was fine. So we're just going to go commit a murder. We're going to wing it, They visited the hospital but got lost in the maze of corridors while looking for the intensive care unit. And what if a cop was stationed by his door? They needed a fresh plan.
Got to plan it.
Later that day, Lugo bought hospital scrubs at a uniform supply store. The next morning, as they prepared to suit up and return, they called to check on Schiller's condition. He was no longer a patient. Sorry, they were informed. No forwarding address. I guess Schiller took Dubois' advice and got out of there just in time.
Yeah, because Mark Schiller spent the next week recovering at Staten Island University Hospital. Now, on Christmas Eve of 1994, he left the hospital and moved into his sister's Long Island home. So he got out of not only Miami, but Florida.
Yeah, he got out. He went up to New York.
He gone. So at this point, he couldn't even get across the room without using a walker. I mean, a simple thing like, taking a leak, emptying his bladder. This was agony. I got to believe it had to be painful. Didn't he say he had to remove his spleen? And
yeah.
So he's undergone quite a bit of surgery.
Messed up.
But he could remember nearly everything that happened the month before. The burns, the beatings, the forced signatures, just the torture, the attempted murder, everything. He also remembered that his former protege, Jorge Delgado, was involved in all of this. Now, Mark called his brother Alex Schiller, who lived in Tampa. Now, Alex Schiller called Delgado, and Alex told Delgado he knew every disgusting detail of the abduction. He knew Delgado and his chums had swindled Mark out of all of his various assets, and he knew about the torture, and he was coming to Miami to avenge that suffering, and Delgado had better grow eyes in the back of his head. So, in other words, now you've got this other guy looking for you. So the tables are kind
Mark's
of turning a little
brother, yeah.
Yeah, turning the tables a little bit. Get these guys on their heels and a little nervous.
Well, apparently that didn't really affect them because by early January 1995, Lugo had moved into Schiller's home and was now owned by D&J International, a Bahamian company set up by Lugo the year prior. He told residents of the neighborhood that his name was Tom and that he and the other gang members were members of the U.S. security forces.
Look up a picture of him. He does not look like a Tom at all.
According to them, Mark Schiller had run into legal trouble and had been deported along with his family. The house was now confiscated and became government property. So, oddly enough, the gang fit right into the neighborhood. They began paying their homeowners association dues. Tom impressed one neighbor couple by climbing up a tall ladder to change a front porch light bulb 2 stories above their welcome mat. He asked another neighbor to accept delivery of packages delivered to the Schiller house if no one was home. The neighbor accepted 12 UPS deliveries and handed them over with no question. Lugo also made some upgrades to the home, including a $7,000 closed-circuit video surveillance package that included waterproof outdoor cameras and sensors and a 25-inch monitor installed inside the main living room.
This is huge. Remember, this is still mid-90s.
Right. He also hired gardeners to add shrubbery and a dense mass of bougainvillea. I'm only guessing that he added all of this to sort of hide the house, if you will. So he had the money, the cars, the house. Now all he needed was a beautiful girl. So Lugo set his eyes on Sabina Petrisky, a 25-year-old dancer who'd modeled for Penthouse and was working at a North Miami Beach strip club called Solid Gold. In the meantime, Dubois was talking to a Hungarian dancer named Beatrice Wieland. Beatrice was said to be the most beautiful girl at Solid Gold. Sabina scored runner-up in the Miss Romania contest in 1990 and now longed for a life as an actress in the West. She flew from Bucharest to Moscow to Havana to Mexico City before entering the United States in the trunk of a car. It was on Super Bowl Sunday that Beatrice told Sabina to go to the champagne room. There was someone wanting to meet her. Sabina remembered Lugo. He liked to slip dollar bills into her garter belt while she danced in the cage. Now, surrounded by provocative strippers, he was telling her that he only wanted to talk. He was in the music business, he said, and wanted to feature her in a music video he'd be filming in London. As the conversation progressed, he periodically handed her 20s. Within a week, the two were dating. Lugo moved Sabina into an apartment and promised to take care of her. She wouldn't have to dance at Solid Gold anymore. Then they began living together. It was convenient for Lugo. He could drive just a few miles and be back with his pregnant wife, Lucretia Goodrich. Remember, he's married. Yeah, with everything that we've told you so far, we may have... No, we didn't forget to tell you that he was married to Adrian Dubois' cousin, Lucretia, who was now apparently pregnant.
Yeah.
But Sabina began to get bored and antsy stuck in her apartment. She questioned Lugo's odd hours and what about the London music video. Lugo responded by telling her that he was actually an undercover CIA agent. He had gone through harrowing missions, one fell apart in a London hotel, and the company left him on his own to survive on leftovers from room service trays. Oh my God.
Oh, how rough is that?
On another CIA job in Hong Kong, he'd had to live for a week in a tree. Lugo swore her to secrecy, and the beautiful Sabina, raised in Romania on a steady diet of American movies, was happy to oblige.
This guy was definitely living in his own mind. Literally,
yes.
His imagination was out there.
Yes.
So, and it will progress as we go here. By now, Adrian Dubois had also moved nearby to a 2-story townhouse apartment a block away on Main Street. This, Sabina learned, was no coincidence. Dubois he also worked for the CIA. Imagine that. So now we got this whole undercover thing happening right now. So Lugo told her it was smarter to have the team in close proximity in case they had to act swiftly. So he's literally playing this up.
I mean, like, he's like going deep with this lie.
Yeah, and he explained that when the guys disappeared for a few days now and then, it was because they were constantly on call. I mean, they had to report to headquarters in Langley, Virginia at a moment's notice, And they had no say in when or why. They just had to do what they were told to do. Remember, they're CIA. And he explained that the life of a secret agent wasn't always glamorous. While the Sun Gym gang was setting up house in Old Cutler Cove, Miami Pride investigator Ed Dubois, who'd advised Schiller to check out of the Jackson Memorial Hospital and leave Miami, received a phone call from New York. Now, he was surprised but glad to learn that Schiller was safe and was healing. Now, Schiller was on his way to Colombia to rejoin his family, but wanted to hire the detective to look into his kidnapping. And Dubois told him to write down everything he could remember about his abduction and torture and send him any documentation he could gather. And a few days later, Schiller flies to Colombia. So he sends the information and flies. He's done.
So when Schiller finally got to a safe place, despite his constant nightmares and unhealed wounds, both physical and mental, Schiller got to work figuring out exactly what all he had lost. With the help of his Miami attorney, Schiller discovered momentous changes in the family's lifestyle. There were $80,000 worth of outrageous charges on their credit cards, all phone orders and not one made by him or his wife. His Schlotsky's Deli franchise had been dissolved. The house now belonged to a Nassau, Bahamas corporation he knew nothing about. His offshore accounts, in which he kept $1.26 million in investments, had been cleaned out. His checking account was completely empty. He began compiling documents that followed the transfers of his property to mysterious offshore companies and people he had never met. The MetLife change of beneficiary policy gave him a laugh, one of the few since his kidnappings. Sure, he'd signed the form, but his signature didn't even run along the line. It rose almost perpendicular, pointing like a rocket off a launch pad. Several of his canceled checks displayed similar strange signature alignments. He couldn't believe his bank had honored them.
He was blindfolded.
And who was this Lillian Torres, to whom he'd signed over his $2 million life insurance policy and the investment in his Lagorce Palace luxury condominium? During Super Bowl week, Schiller's letter arrived at Dubois' office, detailing his brutal ordeal and his certainty that Jorge Delgado, his former business partner and friend, was involved. He also named Daniel Lugo, an associate of Delgado, as one of his captors. Dubois had no idea who these guys were, but the paper trail led straight to the heart of his own professional and personal history. The documents attached to the letter, copies of title and account transfers, had been witnessed and notarized by John Meese, an old Miami Shores acquaintance. So Ed Dubois knows John Meese. Dubois called Schiller and told him that he knew John Meese. Now, remember, back in the beginning, John Meese owned the Sun Gym.
Yeah, he was an accountant, CPA,
yes,
right?
But he owned the Sun Gym.
Yeah, so like Lauren was getting to, John Meese was the starting point for Schiller's file. Dubois knew him as an accountant, a former bodybuilder, and the owner of the Sun Gym and a promoter of bodybuilding competitions. He had known Meese and his family for like 30 years through Miami Shores Country Club and the Kiwanis Club. In fact, Meese occasionally had to use Dubois' detective agency. The two men cut similar figures into the intimate Miami Shores community. And for 5 years in the 70s, they had offices like right across the street from each other in the Shores intimate business district. So these guys were like neighbors in business. And Dubois simply could not picture a dark side to John Meese. This was a guy that he's like, I just don't understand this. This is somebody I know. Anytime someone finds out that, a friend or an acquaintance does some shady shit, it's you're like, no, it can't be that guy. I never saw that.
Yeah. Well, Dubois called Mies and asked for a meeting, adding cryptically that it might be the most important appointment of his life. "What, Ed, you're going to bring me a new client like the NFL or the Dolphins?" Mies joked. Dubois expected to wrap up the whole thing quickly. The meeting took place on February 2nd, 1995 at Mies's Miami Shore office. Mies didn't know anyone named Mark Schiller. Dubois handed him Schiller's letter, studying his face as he read. There wasn't much to discern. "Sounds like this guy had a rough time," said Mies. Did he know Jorge Delgado or Daniel Lugo? To the detective's surprise, Mies said yes. Lugo was employed at his gym and Delgado worked out there. Besides that, they were hardworking businessmen and clients of his. He'd represented both before the IRS. Dubois handed him a copy of a quitclaim deed to Schiller's house and Schiller's MetLife change of beneficiary form. Mies had notarized both.
Uh-oh.
In all, Mies had witnessed and notarized more than $2 million of Schiller's assets in the past few months. The accountant's memory suddenly improved. "Actually," he offered, "Lugo and Delgado brought in some Latin guy with a passport for ID. Maybe this was the man Dubois was asking him about." "Did a woman come in with him?" the detective asked. "No," Mies said. Dubois then pointed out another signature on the deed, that of Diana Schiller, and he produced a copy of her passport. She left the United States on November 18th, but her signature appeared on documents dated November 23rd and November 24th. Now, Diana Schiller, remember, is Mark Schiller's wife.
That's right. She left immediately.
"John, how did you possibly witness the signature of a woman who was in South America that day?" Dubois asked. "Was any other woman here impersonating her?" Mies's recollection was vague about the circumstances surrounding Diana Schiller's signature. Perhaps it was signed before he received the papers, or maybe something screwy had happened. He agreed to set up a meeting for the following day with Lugo and Delgado to straighten out the matter.
Yeah, and as we go along, you'll like when you start doing the research, like, man, this guy had to be like scared. But this Dubois guy is he's business. He's doing his job. He don't care about this. He don't care about Lugo, Delgado, what they've been involved in. This guy's just doing his job. That's what I really like about this Dubois guy.
Right.
So the next day, Lugo did not show up to the meeting, but Delgado does. And Delgado asked to see Schiller's letter as well as the house deed and the change in beneficiary form. He took his time inspecting them before handing the papers back to Dubois. "This is all over a business deal," he said, like it was no big deal. "Well, is it customary in your business deal," asked Dubois, "to kidnap someone, to keep them hostage for a month, beat them, torture them, try to kill them, blow them up?" "I'm not going to comment on that," Delgado replied, and at this point he's kind of growing a little edgy. And Dubois jabbed a thick index finger in Delgado's face. It finally dawned on me as to what really happened here. Dubois went on to explain his theory to everyone in the room. It would have been the perfect crime had Schiller actually died, which, again, wasn't his time. You had his cash, property, cars, home, plus $2 million bonus if he died. You had his family leave the country, him playing a role about a young girl in a midlife crisis. You had his phone calls diverted from his home to the warehouse, where you had him chained to a wall. If he died, you would have been successful. But guess what, asshole? Schiller's alive and well, and we're going to put your ass in jail. And at this point, Delgado becomes obviously very uncomfortable. And John Mies, he butted in and suggested yet another meeting. This time, let's get Mr. Lugo here. Now, he'd bring in Lugo the next day to explain the whole situation. They'd meet at Mies's branch office in Miami Lakes. And the next morning, Dubois and his bodyguard, Ed Siebert, arrived early to the meeting. Now, when Mies arrived, he ushered them into a room that Lugo used for his office. The very room, in fact, where the gang had planned Schiller's kidnapping, to wait there for the rest of participants to arrive. Now, they took the time to dig in the trash can in Lugo's office. That is where they struck gold. Now, this right here is a very seasoned investigator. Like, okay, we're in this room. Let's just have a look around. So usually you think you'd be looking in file cabinets and drawers. This guy
let's look in the trash.
Goes to the trash can. Now, what he found were these discarded papers, and these discarded papers contained references to the Sun Gym and the Schiller abduction. and the Schiller abduction suspects. An envelope from Central Bank contained the January 1995 bank statements of Sun Fitness Consultants, Inc. Now, this is located at the same address as the Sun Gym. Now, the crumpled up statement showed that in January of 1995, the Sun Gym gang wrote various checks totaling $163,969.57. Now, how does a shit operation like Sun Fitness blow through almost $200,000 in a month, he asked. And money had to represent a portion of Schiller's stolen fortune. I mean, it's the only thing he can come up with. Now, in part, the payees included the cast of characters who starred in the Schiller abduction. $30,000 alone went to Carl Weeks, who we discussed earlier. The U.S. government also received a portion of the Schiller bounty. Now, this was a cashier's check for $67,845, which paid off Lugo's court-order restitution, remember, from the 1981 fraud conviction. Now, Lugo still was on parole and couldn't possibly explain the sudden acquisition of $70,000 on his Sun Gym salary. But his boss, Mies, had purchased the cashier's check. Now, Mies attached a letter stating he'd paid that much for a software program that Lugo had created for the gym. Through old-fashioned money laundering, they moved the money and the funds from Schiller's Cayman Islands offshore account to the Sun Fitness Consultants to Mies' Sun Gym account to the central bank, where Mies and Associates had an operational account and where Mies bought the cashier's check. So this all works in correlation together. The mysterious Lillian Torres, Adrian Doorbal, the Spy Shop, and Jomar Properties also profited from Schiller's 4 signatures. That's a mess. So he finds all this out by some stuff that he finds in the trash.
Yeah.
And sees all this stuff. So now he's actually, and I think they stole them. They took the stuff out of the trash and put it in briefcases.
Yeah. Dubois and Siebert quickly gathered all the evidence and shoved it in their briefcase. Just then, Jorge Delgado showed up alone, and Dubois, buoyed by Mies's colossal mistake, launched into his list of accusations. Suddenly, Delgado interrupted. "We're not going to talk about this anymore," he said. "Well then, why are we here?" "Because we're going to give you Schiller's money back, the $1 million. The return was conditional," Delgado explained. "First, Dubois and Schiller would have to sign an agreement that they would never repeat the story to anyone, certainly not the police. Then and only then, Schiller would see the $1.26 million from the offshore accounts he'd signed over." The detective agreed to talk to his client, and Delgado proposed a brief contract. The meeting was over. But Dubois and Siebert knew that letting the Sun Gym gang off the hook for this one would just be like giving them a pass to do it again to someone else.
And I'm gonna believe in this Dubois guy because I think he's a very, very smart man.
I agree.
So you want to go ahead and wrap it up? Let's go ahead and wrap this up. We'll call this part 1.
Part 1.
And stay tuned. I don't know when part 2 is coming. It might be next year. I think we should probably
tomorrow.
Wait. Oh, tomorrow?
Tomorrow.
You sure?
Part 1, yes.
Us, like 2023, we could say Happy New Year's again and finish this case off.
No, tomorrow. Stay tuned tomorrow for part 2.
Part 2 coming. Wait, to be continued. Which I used to hate that. We'd watch TV shows and then you'd be like so into it and all of a sudden it's like to be continued. Like, oh no. Especially the ones that were like every week. Because you had to wait all week.
Right.
We're not going to do that to you guys tonight. So,
stay tuned tomorrow for part 2. That's it for tonight. Again, if you'd like to support the show, please subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/Palmahawk Media. That's PALMAHAWK Media.
And be sure to check out our website for links to all of our social media, Patreon, our merch store, and much, much more.
And please make sure to subscribe to the show on whatever platform you're listening on and rate and review. This really, really, really helps us branch out and reach a wider audience.
And thank you everyone so much for listening
to Paradise After Dark.
Dark, 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 dark.